So I'm James Lowery. I'm doing a science project for the Birmingham Mineral Railroad. And what I'm doing is putting up signs throughout central Alabama, 6 counties, where the Birmingham Mineral Railroad ran. So that's what we're going to look at today, is the railroad in history, as well as where some of the signs are. Okay. We're going to include Trussville. I came right out here to where you're sitting right now. The blast furnace was right here, and the coke oven. So the project is a project of the Mid-South chapter of the Railway and Locomotive Historical Society, and all the sign costs have been donations that individuals and organizations have provided. The Birmingham Mineral Railroad was an L&N system, Louisville and Nashville Railroad system. The Historical Society gave me permission to use the logo in the presentation as well as on the signs, as we'll see. So people ask me what happened to L&N, what happened to Louisville and Nashville Railroad. So back in the day, when the Louisville and the Nashville Railroad was in operation, and actually the through tracks and going through Birmingham for the L&N started in Cincinnati and went all the way down through like Nashville and all the way through Birmingham, Montgomery, all the way to Mobile. So that was the main line, very historic and older main line. And so if you were riding as a passenger anywhere north or south, then you rode on the L&N. But during that time, there was also the Seaboard Airline Railroad Company. And so you should ask them why they call it airline if it's a railroad. Well, back then, before airplanes, airline meant you went from point A to point B. You didn't do it in the air necessarily, but that's what an airline was back then. So then those two merged together and became the Seaboard System Railroad. And then there were several name changes through here. One of them was Chessie. You may remember some of the train cars had a Cheshire cat image as part of the logo. And then some more name changes. Today it's a CSX Transportation. So if you see CSX trains, they had their beginning as L&N. So a lot of the L&N Railroad is still being used by CSX. And the Birmingham Mineral Railroad, a lot of it is still being used by CSX. And so the signs project, the purpose is to put the signs up in high visibility areas where a lot of people will see them. Doesn't do any good for me to put a sign way out in the countryside where nobody's going to see it in agriculture or something. I have them in agricultural areas, but where roads cross, where the roads have been built on the railroad, etc. So because people walk and drive and bicycle throughout the central part of Alabama and never sometimes realize that they're crossing a historic railroad roadbed, or that they're walking on one or bicycling on one. It's not a rails to trails project. So that's like the Chief Ladiga Trail up in Anniston, where they've taken a railroad roadbed and made it into a trail. There are some like that, the Vulcan Trail, in Fultondale, the Cane Creek Trail. Those are on the roadbed, but this is not a project to do that. Very expensive to do that. You got to get all the property ownership and all that. All I have to do is get permission from somebody like the city of Trussville to put my sign up, and I'm good to go. And so a lot of the railroad roadbed nowadays is not contiguous. So a lot of mine is in pieces, and it's been built on just like this blast furnace was built on here. So the sign, these are the signs. As you can see, the L&N logo there. So the project differs from other projects in the Birmingham area in several ways. It covers all the areas of Birmingham, all the Birmingham City Council districts and all of Jefferson County districts had the railroad in them. And I've got signs in all of those districts. And it covered all the socioeconomic statuses in the Birmingham area. So all throughout the Birmingham area, from southwest Birmingham, north Birmingham, the Mountain Brook, all the statuses had the railroads running in them. And then it reached into many surrounding communities, not just in places like Birmingham, but Mountain Brook, as you can see here, Trussville, Helena, Oneonta, throughout 6 counties in central Alabama. And it's educating the general public. So historical societies like yours can get historic information out to their members or people coming by the museum, but the general public oftentimes never gets that information. So these signs are designed to reach the general public. And one example of how that's working well is on Montclair Road. The whole length of Montclair Road, the Birmingham Mineral Railroad ran parallel to it, just like right behind the Crestline Post Office. Roadbed's still there. And so the city of Mountain Brook has done a traffic study, and along there I have 7 signs. And so they found that the traffic on Montclair Road, daily traffic, was 45,000 vehicles. So you multiply that out, and potentially my signs are viewed 315,000 times every day, just along that stretch of Montclair Road. So you multiply that by the 199 signs that I have, and it comes out to be a lot of people, general public, that see it. And like I said, it's a non-contiguous trail, very cost-effective signage. So the signage did not cost me much. I use posts to put them up, and I put them all up. So there's no cost other than getting the signs made. So the BMR is 67 main branches, 332 miles long, and that is farther than the distance from, actually I've updated this now, so there's more. There's 392, I've listed all the branches online, and there's 68 main branches. And so the current amount of trackage that I've calculated is 392 miles, and that's farther than the distance from the Tennessee line to Gulf Shores, Alabama. So it was a major railroad. It went in 7 counties. It actually served 6 counties, but it cut through a corner of Walker County going down to another mine in Jefferson County. To date, I have 199 signs up in all 6 counties in central Alabama. It transported the raw materials from the mines and the quarries, and the coke from the coke ovens. As a matter of fact, there was a huge number of coke. You had a huge number of coke ovens out here that were connected to the blast furnaces. And at one time, 5,500 coke ovens just in Birmingham itself. And so those were a huge operation that you had to coke the coal before you put it in the blast furnace. So what does that mean? And so the coal is a lot of carbon, but it's got a lot of impurities in it. And so what they do is they put them in the coke ovens that they call them beehive ovens. So these were all lined up, a dome kind of shape inside. They would pour the material into the top, and pour the coal into the top and light it, but then they would close a little door on the front and only allow a little bit of oxygen in there, just enough to make it smolder, because you didn't want the coal to catch on fire. It then burns and becomes ash, just like your charcoal. So they would control the amount of air coming in, and they would smolder that coal, and what it would do is burn off the impurities, and you come down to almost pure carbon, and very lightweight, very porous, because that's what they needed to put in the blast furnaces, because that burned hotter than just putting coal in there. So Birmingham's phenomenal growth and development. This was Birmingham's first economic development. We talk about economic development nowadays. This is the first economic development. Before these railroads came in, there was a little bit of mining going on in the Birmingham area before the Civil War and during the Civil War and after the Civil War. But everything had to be hauled by wooden wagons, pulled by oxen or mules. So you don't build an iron industry city on wooden wagon traffic pulled by oxen. So the entrepreneurs that were wanting to open up more blast furnaces, open up more mines, they went to L&N and said, we need a railroad to do this, to haul this stuff. So L&N saw it as a very big economic opportunity. So here's just another example of before all the railroads came in. This is wooden wagon pulled by mules. And the people that would run this was teamsters, because they had a team of oxen that was their responsibility. Well, even today we still use the term teamsters for the unions, and that's where it originated, is they were the ones that control the teams of animals. So just some more examples of quotes. Birmingham Mineral Railroad unlocked the riches of Red Mountain back in the 1880s. L&N Railroad, by the construction of Birmingham, and the Alabama Mineral, we'll see where it went, in the 1880s, brought the mines to the doors of hundreds of mines and furnaces. So this is the logo. It combines the coal, the iron ore, and the limestone in with the railroad. So these were the hand picks that the miners used before mechanization to chip out the coal and chip out the iron ore to be loaded on the railroads. So past and present, this was a century-long railroad. The first rails were laid in 1884 in what's now Red Mountain Park, the South Branch. It was in operation even until 1984, and then even after that, the railroad employees and the railroad was considering it to be the Birmingham Mineral Railroad. And even today, some of the segments are still in use by CSX for running the current trains. So what they do is if you already had tracks there, if you already had a roadbed that you own, then they would just add heavier duty rails. So the rails today are more massive and bigger because they've got heavier trains running on them. But a lot of it is still in use today. And it's also visible in a lot of places, the roadbed is. And it's been turned into some walking trails. So this is the South Branch. South Trail in Red Mountain Park is named South Trail, BMRR South Trail, but nobody was telling anybody what BMRR stood for. And so I put one of my signs up above this one so people will know what that was all about. So that's where the first rails were laid. And so you had, it started out in the steam-powered era and morphed into the diesel engine period and was still being used. So it's just an example of the timetable for passenger traffic. So you can see the Birmingham Mineral boils coming on out to Mineral Springs and Bessemer, Tuscaloosa, just all over. We'll see some more of these places that it went. It had passenger service. So it was really a freight railroad, but if you have freight trains going to outlying areas, you can throw a passenger car or two on there and provide passenger service. So sometimes on the weekends it would be passenger-only cars because they weren't operating the mines as much, but then you could also have a mixed train with both of them. One of the examples, I'm gathering anecdotal stories about the Birmingham Mineral Railroad, and you can see those on the website that's on the card that you have. So one of them was that the Birmingham Mineral Railroad started a branch going in Boyles Yard, Tarrant area, heading toward Oneonta, and on past there to Attala, where it hooked into the Alabama Mineral, also an L&N system that served the eastern part of the state there. And so Altoona, Alabama, is between Oneonta and Attala. And so before the railroad got to Altoona, to go from Altoona to Birmingham was a 3-day journey. You put your family on the wagon and you headed to Birmingham, and you had pulled by mules or horses. And so then it was a 3-day trip, so you had to spend the night, 2 nights before you got to Birmingham. So the last night they spent was in the northern part of Tarrant. There's a big open field there that's now the Billy Hewitt Park, and it's right beside 5 Mile Creek. So you'd spend the night there, pitch camp there, your family would spend the night. You had the water in the creek for the horses or mules. A half a mile away, you had Big Spring that's still running to this day. You had fresh water there to stock up your family's fresh water. And then the next day, you broke camp and you made it on into Birmingham. So that was 3 days to get to Birmingham. And then your return trip, same thing, 3 days to get back. So you didn't come from Altoona to Birmingham very often. When the railroad arrived, though, in Altoona, Birmingham Mineral Railroad, it was a day round trip to come to Birmingham. People could bring their products, their agricultural products, into Birmingham. They could take Birmingham products back out to where they lived, and some of the people could then go to work in Birmingham. So they could ride the train into Birmingham and work and then ride the train back. So it's very important to have passenger service that really opened up these outlying areas. Okay? So the passenger service was through the Union Station in downtown Birmingham, not the terminal station. That was a different railroad company. But the Union Station is where Amtrak Station is now. Okay? So here's the very first L&N station was a freight station, it was freight depot in Birmingham. And then they built this one. So this is the Union Station at Morris Avenue and 20th Street. And there you can see the railroad tracks. This was a shed where you stood to get on the train. And there it is with 1898 with the soldiers leaving to go to the Spanish-American War. So then this is the intersection of 20th Street looking north. And so the L&N station is right here. Okay, so this is 20th Street, and this is became the heaviest corner on earth when they built the high-rise buildings there. So there's another view of it, 20th Street. You notice the streetcar tracks, person on a bicycle, and there's the L&N station. So this is the timetable for the Union. It's called a Union Station because it was several different train companies using it. And if we just highlight the Birmingham Mineral Railroad timetable here, Blockton, Aniana, arrival and departure. And you have the timetable number 41 on display, and you've got a picture or image of the train coming to Trussville. And so it would have been coming out of the Union Station in downtown Birmingham, coming to Trussville, to the Trussville Depot, the picture over there, and providing service to downtown Birmingham. So Age Herald, 1901, the newspapers were the only way that people had back then to know when the train schedule changed. Okay? And so they would publish these changes in the newspaper back then. But you can see some of the different places that you could ride to. So what happened was there was so much ground traffic, street traffic, going across those tracks. I showed you the picture of like the bicycle and the streetcar. And so there were 10 tracks there. That was all industrial through there in Birmingham, downtown Birmingham, Powell Avenue and Morris Avenue. All that was industrial. Well, you had the ground traffic, the street traffic, and you had to back then there was no electric signals for the track crossings. So you had to have a flagman there 24 hours a day that either stopped the train and let the vehicle traffic go by, or stop the vehicle traffic and let the train go by. So that became very annoying, very hard to manage. So what they do is they raise the tracks up to where they are now. Because you drive under those tunnels, under the tracks, were put there in 1930. And so, but they came up and they built then the platform there was raised up to be even with the tracks. And that's the same platform that you stand on today for getting on Amtrak. So the Amtrak station is right here on the other side, and so that's where you get the train. So that shed that you're standing under in that concrete dates to 1930. So sometimes a passenger depot was located next to the freight depot. This was out in Bessemer. And then sometimes the freight and passenger station was all together. So this one in Helena handled both the freight coming in and going out, as well as the passenger service. This is Woodstock, just showing another example. This is very similar to the depot you had in Trussville. So it's very similar kind of construction there. And this was the passenger part, and this was the freight part here. And then Pinson, just another example of a little depot handling the passenger and freight service. So mail service. So if you also got a train going, then you can put a railway post office car on it, and the guys would sort the mail on the train as they picked it up from one community, and before they got to the next community, they would be sorting that mail, and some of it may be for that next community, and so they drop that off. And so the trains oftentimes didn't have to stop at a depot, but they had to get the mail on the train and off the train. So they put the mail in a canvas bag and they'd hang it on a hook. As the train went by, the baggage car person would grab that canvas bag and pull it onto the car and then start sorting it. Or if they got to a location, they had some mail for that particular community, they'd throw that canvas bag out at the depot. The depot agent would come out and get it and deliver it. Okay. So had mail service. And then one of the stories we came across, one of our members was at a restaurant and struck up this conversation with this person, and he had been one of the people that actually owned the Birmingham Mineral Railroad, one of those mail cars. And so he said that they would start out in Tarrant area in Birmingham, and they would go all the way through Oneonta, picking up mail, dropping off mail, through Attala, hooked to the Alabama Mineral, and go all the way down to Calera, doing the same thing. Calera, they'd pull the car off on the siding, they'd spend the night, get back on the next day, and come back to Birmingham. So that was his mail route. Okay. And this is a postcard that we have come across that took a 9-mile journey on that railroad on one of his cars, his railway cars. So it was mailed and then dropped off in Shelby, Alabama, which is near Calera. Okay. So a clarification terminology, this was a full-size railroad, full-size freight cars, full-size rails. But you also had trams and dinky lines, and we'll look at this. The trams were more narrow gauge. In here in the display case in the bottom, you've got a tram rail. So those were smaller tram cars that would go into the mines and bring material out of the mines. We'll see exactly that. So railroads generally and rail lines were standard gauge. And then dinky lines were short railroads, a lot of them streetcar kinds of rails. So there's a tram car, and this is the size rail that you have in the display there. And there's a size comparison to a person. And here's some of those exact same type cars being pulled by a mule out of the mine there in Brookside. And then there's a comparison of a regular rail from that era, or spike from that era, and one of the tram spikes. And then I had a piece of rail that when I was growing up, my father had used this as an anvil. He'd gotten somebody cutting a piece of rail, and so that's the same size as Birmingham Mineral Railroad rails were. And there's a comparison to a tram rail. On Rocky Mountain Nature Preserve, they needed to make a grate. You had a bunch of tram rails laying around that you didn't need, so you made a grate out of them. There's a quarter for scale. And I love this because this is Tanny Hill over toward Tuscaloosa. This was not Tannehill. This was a different name, Tanny Hill Mine. And so here is the tram rails going in and out of the openings. And I love this. You can tell which are the management that have the white shirts on and the vest, and which are not management. And so he is manually turning the turntable to line up the appropriate rails for that tram rail. And then out in Tarrant, you've probably seen this locomotive. So this was a siding going off to the quarry there. Did not operate at that quarry, but it was bought here, and that's a typical size that we use, so like a switching engine. And then the dinky lines also are oftentimes the streetcar lines. That's a dinky locomotive, steam locomotive. And sometimes they would put a false shell over to make it look like it blend in well with the streetcar. So those were used on shorter lines, and they were smaller vehicles. So what did Birmingham Mineral look like? This is a Porto Road. Before it was a Porto Madrid, it was separated. And so this is when the Porto Road out near Eastwood Mall area was a dirt road, dirt street. And there's a Birmingham Mineral trestle going across. And there's the same engine going toward Irondale and to serve the Rocky Mountain Nature Preserve mines and come on to Trussville. Okay, so that would have been coming on to Trussville. And then why did I show this modern one from 1989? If I'm talking about the Birmingham Mineral Railroad was no longer operating there, it's because of these abutments. Okay, so this is Irondale, Irondale Cafe area, and so this was Amtrak coming through there, through the gap. This is a red gap here, coming through the gap, and so there are abutments here that were the Birmingham Mineral Railroad, just as you saw, that was holding up this trestle here. I understand some of the crews wonder what all these were. I've thought about walking down here and putting up one of my signs, but that would be very illegal. So also in English Village, in Mountain Brook area, before there was a Mountain Brook, English Village was there, and it was a industrial area. And here's the Birmingham Mineral Railroad tracks going right through it. It went from Irondale, below Vulcan Park, all the way across Green Springs into Red Mountain Park area. So these were their active tracks to English Village even until 1954 when they were taken out. As I said, it was an industrial area before it was residential. And here's some of the companies, industrial facilities that were there in English Village that were served by the Birmingham Mineral Railroad. Variety of things. And there are two mining era houses still there in Mountain Brook. In English Village, behind, off one of the alleys, comes down, and these are still occupied. Pyramid with the chimney in the middle, and so those were the mining era when that was industrial in English Village, and they're still there and being used. Came underneath Vulcan, but became Vulcan Park and crossed over there, and this was when they were building the streetcar from Birmingham over into Homewood, and they had to raise the trestle up and make it a newer iron trestle, originally wooden, and concrete here to get it so the streetcar could go underneath. Inslee, all these are L&N cars that are serving the blast furnaces in Inslee. And then Helena, this is the Helena depot train station on the Birmingham Mineral. That other one I showed you, that small one, was on a different railroad line, and it's been moved from its location over into Old Town Helena, where it made into a restaurant. This one is no longer existent. So this is the Birmingham Mineral Railroad through Helena, and then these are this is the other railroad tracks companies that went through there. In Oneonta, they moved the train station to a park in Oneonta, and there's where the passenger part was with the agent, and this was a freight area here. Altoona, remember I mentioned the train got to Altoona, and so they had a depot there, and these people in their buggies are all dressed up for the annual foot washing ceremony, okay? The religious ceremony. Okay? So where was it located? Various sections were called branches. And like I said, we now know there's 68 of them, 68 branches. So this is just showing you a few of those branches and where they went to give you a feel. So South Branch, Southwest Birmingham, Red Mountain Park, Bessemer, North Branch, and then Southwest Birmingham. So you should ask me, why is it called the North Branch if it went through Southwest Birmingham? Well, the reason is when the railroad came into what's now Red Mountain Park, it was serving the mines openings that were on the south side of Red Mountain, okay, on Lakeshore Drive area. And so that's the South Branch was the first one that was named the South Branch because it served those. But then later they added the North Branch on the other side, on the north side of Red Mountain, and so it goes through what's now Southwest Birmingham. There was no Birmingham back then, at least it was not coming out that far. So it was serving the north side, so it was a North Branch. Okay? Red Gap Branch, we've talked about. Huntsville Branch number 1 and Huntsville Branch number 2. Huntsville Branch number 1 went Bessemer through North Birmingham all the way to Tarrant. And then Huntsville Branch number 2 came out of North Birmingham and went through Pinson, Oneonta, Altoona, onto Attala. So you should ask me, all right, neither one of those went to Huntsville. Why were they named Huntsville Branch? The reason is they followed the route of the old Huntsville Road. So Huntsville Road, there's still sections in North Birmingham of the Huntsville Road. Huntsville Avenue, Huntsville Road will be a block or two, it's still on the maps. It went from Huntsville all the way down through Birmingham and to Tuscaloosa, and I understand all the way to Montevallo. So it was called the Huntsville Road because that's the route that you took to go from Huntsville to Birmingham and Tuscaloosa, because going north like we go on I-65, there's too many ridges and mountains to maneuver. And so you came around through the Gadsden area and you came down that way. So that Huntsville Road originally was an Indian trail and an Indian road, and then later the pioneers started using that route to get into central Alabama. So coming from the Carolinas and Virginia, they would come down through, they would cross the Tennessee River there and come on down and follow on that road on into the central part of Alabama to settle it. So that's why it's called the Huntsville Branch, because it follows that old Huntsville Road. Okay, Helena and Blockton. So now some history. When I put up my first sign, I decided to put it up over, I had figured out on the maps, this was the railroad roadbed, First Avenue South over in the Woodlawn area. And so I went over and I knew that this was a good spot. So I drove what I do is I drive a metal rod down, and when if I hit a boulder or something on the ground, I move over, And so I drove my rod down, and just about 8 inches underground, I hit wood. So I said, aha, there's a cross tie underneath there. So I knew I was exactly in the right spot. And as you can see, the Piggly Wiggly was built on part of the roadbed. So I was putting my post up, and the guy comes out from across the street who owned this property, and I told him what I was doing. He loved it. He knew he had railroad here when he bought it, but he didn't know anything about the railroad. So he had his guys help me, put up the sign. He loved it. So then as I left to go back to my van, I looked at the street. This is First Avenue South, and there are the rails underneath the pavement. So a lot of times that's how you can find that because the pavement is disturbed there and broken, then that's the rails underneath. This is where his facility was. The depot is located right here. So I was going back to my van, and I looked at the stop sign, looked sort of strange. So I went over, and they had used a piece of Birmingham Mineral Railroad rail that was laying around the city of Birmingham. I cannot imagine what it took to drive that. Your piece of rail here is about that size, if you can imagine driving that in. Okay. So then this was the Woodlawn Depot. It's been moved and restored down to the Calera Railroad Museum, and they let me put my sign up since it was a part of the Birmingham Mineral Railroad. So a little bit of history of Birmingham Mineral Railroad and maps. We have a map problem. It's a problem of resolution. So it's such a big system, then getting all of the Birmingham Mineral Railroad onto one map makes it be a very big map. So this is the biggest one we have, about 7 feet long. It is only showing Bessemer around to Irondale. Okay, so that's just a tiny piece of the whole 6-county system. So if you double the width and triple the height, you would pretty much get all of it on. So the railroads back then would do these sort of cartoonish things showing the different stops that they went on. So here is the going from Bessemer and out to Brookwood, Birmingham Mineral, and then it got to this area in Blount County north of Altoona. It had encountered a ridge that it couldn't get around, and so it had to build a tunnel. The only tunnel on the whole system, Birmingham Mineral Railroad system, is right there. So they had to build a tunnel. Once they built the tunnel, they were able to extend it onto Attala. In Attala, it connected to the Alabama Mineral that was serving these mines and blast furnaces. But you didn't realize there was a lot of mines and blast furnaces in those towns. So the Alabama Mineral was also an L&N system that connected them, and so then it became an entire loop there. So this is a map that shows nearly all of the Birmingham Mineral System, and Birmingham is a dot. So talk about the resolution problem. So once you get all of it shown, then cities and towns become a dot. This is the Cahaba coal field. This is a huge map And we've got this online. You can actually pull this up from the website. You can zero in or expand in here, and all of the Birmingham Mineral Railroad is shown throughout here. It's just you got to get closer in. And then this is the entire Birmingham Mineral, plus some other railroads included through all these different counties. It's a big map. And then this is just a subset showing Red Mountain, again showing that serving the iron ore on Red Mountain and opening all those mines up. So some of the other maps, historic maps, show the Birmingham Mineral Railroad, but that's not the important thing for that map. This is Jefferson County street and highway map. So you got those are shown, highlighted, but the Birmingham Mineral is really sort of a suppressor. And actually Gene Melton here in Trussville gave me that map to put in the top. Same thing here, you had a Birmingham street map, and Birmingham Mineral is in here, but it's lost in all the other streets that they're trying to feature in that map. TCI, another company, coal mining company and blast furnaces. TCI map shows also the Birmingham Mineral because they would share trackage rights. So TCI would use the Birmingham Mineral to get to some places and to their other facilities. So this is a TCI map, and again, the Bessemer is showing the Bessemer to the Irondale area. And so I walked into the engineer's office, permits and engineering office, City of Birmingham, when I was doing the beginning of my project because I needed to get permission of the City of Birmingham for me to put them on their right-of-ways, just like Gene Melton gave me permission to put them on right-of-ways in Trussville. And so I walked into the office of the two engineers who were working on their job. One of their assignments was find all the railroad right-of-ways in the City of Birmingham ever that had been there, because they got caught a couple of times. So when they went to build and design Railroad Park, they had it designed to go right up to the railroad tracks, active railroad tracks right there, so people could walk right up like in Irondale, at the Irondale Cafe, and walk and enjoy the railroad. The trains going by. Well, before they started construction, BNSF said, we own that area there between where your park will be and the railroad tracks, and you can't use that. So now there's a no man's land there. Okay? So the City of Birmingham didn't realize that a railroad owned that property. The other part was when they started building Regents Field downtown, they found that there was a railroad right-of-way going right through the property where Regents Field was going to be built. So Birmingham City got caught a couple of times, and they assigned these two people to find every single railroad right-of-way in the City of Birmingham. So I walked into their office one day, and they had this map on the wall, and they colorized it. So they took colored pencils, and they colored all the waterways. They colored all the railroads to be a reddish, and they colored and highlighted every mine that was in that whole area. And I said, wow. So he gave me permission to take it to Office Depot. I scanned it, so we have a copy of that. So you just see what a network of how many mines there were. So history of Birmingham and personal experiences. People, even living today, had the active railroad going in their backyard or going across their property there and behind their property. And some people are walking on the trail. And just want to highlight some of that. So this is the dividing line between the City of Birmingham and the City of Mountain Brook. So this is the houses on Carlisle Road back up to the railroad right-of-way, and the houses on Sterling and Mountain Brook back up to the railroad. So halfway here is the dividing line between the City of Birmingham and Mountain Brook. So people still have some of it in their backyards, and they're proud of that. So here's showing that backyard. The guy had it surveyed and took his half into his property on Carlisle Road. Out in Bessemer, it's a place where the rails are still in the landscaping here. Very rare that you find the rails because when they would abandon a section, they would take the rails out because that's valuable scrap iron, and they'd leave the old cross ties because they didn't care about that. So here's an example of active tracks out in the Bessemer area, and they'll replace the the old cross ties, throw them off to the side with new ones because they're active CSX tracks. So I got some pieces like this in my backyard, and it's interesting that every one of these cross ties is still doing its work. In other words, it has still got the creosote in it, and I have never found any bug anywhere near any of these cross ties laying on the ground, and you can still smell the creosote in it. So history is being uncovered as part of the old stone box culverts. So whenever they found a dip, like in a ravine or a dip, a low spot, the railroad roadbed has to be flat. It can't be over 2% grade. So they had to fill in any low spots. And if the low spot had water, either rainwater or a creek going through it, they had to fill that in and then put a culvert for that water to flow through, because they knew it was going to keep flowing through. Water always wins and gravity always wins. Okay, so even if you try to deal with the water and stop it, excuse me, it's coming from underground, give up. So what they do now is they put a spring box. So they have a concrete box that is open on the top, and on one side there's a hole for a pipe. Okay, so you turn that upside down and place it on the spring, and the water is still running into that box and out that pipe into the city system. And so back then what they had to do was put a culvert. And so a lot of those are the beautiful cut stone culverts. They're still there. Every one of these, over hundreds of them that we found, are still carrying water to this day. And we're talking about 150-year-old structures. So this is below the former trail that was below Trinity Hospital. So but every one of them, we have never found any obstruction inside. No branches caught, no leaf buildup at all. So I speculate that there's a reason for that. They had to build these things way out, hundreds of them way out in the countryside. They couldn't go and periodically maintain them and clear them out. So most all of them have the bevel sides, hand-cut stones here, and beveled. Why would you go to the trouble of beveling those if nobody's going to see them? Okay, they're not for ornamentation. And also on the bottom, you always have these humps, either carved into the solid stone like these are on the bottom, or sometimes they would lay bricks at an angle to make that. And then the bottom of the lintels here are always just sort of flat. So my speculation is that combination made the water turbulent and continues to make the water turbulent as it flows through and keeps them clear. It's another example of that. And then I was very surprised. I opened up my Popular Mechanics a few years ago, and out in the desert, this was an old railroad roadbed, way out in the southwest desert, and there you got the same construction there. And then another surprise was I opened up Railroad History magazine, and they are built on the New York and Erie Railroad in 1846, and it's the same construction. So the railroad companies knew how to do it way back before the Civil War. And so they built these stone culverts like that. Another example of huge lintels holding up the roadbed and the weight of the train, of course. And here's one in Ruffner Mountain Nature Preserve, and see how gigantic some of these stones were. So they had to quarry those, had to cut them, had to ship them and bring them here, and then lay all this stuff. And all that was done back in the steam-powered days, before the mechanization, the bulldozers, cranes that we have today. So it's a massive undertaking, but they had to do it. They knew they had to do it because they had to handle the water. So the specs, the L&N specs indicate that if you calculate the drainage of an area, so you have to calculate how much water is going to be coming down through that ravine or low spot, and you had to size your culvert accordingly. So even today, it is very, very hard to calculate the drainage of a huge area, because you've got to take into consideration the soil types. Is it clay? Is it loose? The size? How much trees are there? Etc. And back then, in the 1800s, they were doing that They were calculating how much water they needed to handle. So if the amount of water would mean that they could have a opening that was 36 inches, then they would use a pipe. Much easier, lay the pipe down, cover it over, and you go. But if it was beyond 36 inches, you had to build one of these box culverts, stone culvert. This is Ruffner Mountain with the yardstick in there. Also, Ruffner Mountain Nature Preserve, some of them were the clay tile, clay terracotta, and then that's looking through one of those. That's at Ruffner Mountain. And then here's a farm. The railroad roadbed went through here. The farmer is still using the culvert as the bridge over his little creek that's there. Usually I have Peggy stand for size, but this had a barbed wire, so I use the cow for size. North of Pinson from Highway 79, Highway 75, you can see this, a double culvert roadbed as part of the farm. There's a roadbed coming out to the street. A double one in Altoona. Some of these were big enough that the farmers would drive their cows through there from one side of the farm to the other. Up in Altoona, we know exactly where those stones came from because one of the lintels was not needed and was left in the quarry near Altoona. So the cut stone and other bridges are still carrying some active tracks. This is in Bessemer, so one of the bridges, trestles built with that stone construction, is still carrying active tracks. Out in the north end of Tarrant, you have the quarry there, and you can see the rails there, and this little trestle is still carrying the water. And there it comes across the driveway, and that little dinky engine. The Birmingham Mineral is here. This was a siding coming off serving that quarry. So I mentioned the tunnel, the only tunnel. This is Altoona. You can see how the concrete is melded into the solid rock. So the concrete didn't come in use by the railroads until the early 1900s. And so here's one of the early uses of concrete by the railroads. There's a look through the tunnel. And then they had trestles in Altoona. This is called the Big Trestle. There's another view of it. Currently, you can drive right through it. And then there's a diesel engine using it near Altoona. And there's the little trestle they refer to in Altoona, little trestle, in a farmland here. Notice the farmer used some of the old cross ties for his fence post. If they're laying around, why not? And then Highway 75, right beside Highway 75, going across Gurley Creek there. As I said, they would take up the rails and just leave everything else when they abandoned a section. This one's interesting because they actually made a walkway for people. Usually you want to keep the people off of the railroad, but they made a walkway because that was the only way that these people had to get across this creek was there. And then another over Turkey Creek nearby. So only the iron rails were removed, and here are rails to nowhere. Okay, so they left the rails, still maintain, the highway department still maintaining those, and there hasn't been railroad trains on this for decades, and they're still maintaining that. So sometimes the entire rails and switches and cross ties are left in place, usually not. So here's some, they're way out in the woods, and so they didn't bother to haul them out, and they not have the personnel to do it. It may have been too costly. And you have a piece of rail, which is very rare to have a piece of rail from that era because they did take them out for scrap iron. So history is also being uncovered with anecdotal stories, and I mentioned one that you already talked about. We talked about as far as the going from Altoona to Birmingham 3-day trip. There was a person who told me that lived near English Village, and he said that there was a guy that lived in Irondale, and he figured out that the wheels on his car were the same distance apart as the rails on the railroad. And so he would take some air out of the tires, drive up onto the rails, and he would drive his friends all the way to English Village. They get off, turn the car around, and go back. So the engine, there was no freight. Freight trains don't have schedules. And so you have passenger trains scheduled. And so the engineers had to always be on the lookout for what's happening on the rails up ahead. Okay, so sees a car coming along, that's a bad sign. So one of the stories was that Mimi Tynes, I don't know if you know Mimi Tynes, Tynes family in Birmingham. And so she said that her brother Bland was anything but bland when he was growing up. So one day he came home from school. Their backyard backed up to the active railroad tracks over Mountain Brook. And so one day he came home from school, put on his cowboy outfit, stood in the middle of the tracks with his cap pistol and held up the train. The engineer stopped the train, got out and gave him a spanking and sent him home. And then Frank Tynes said that when his father got home, Frank is his brother, when his father got home, he gave Bland another spanking when he found out what happened. And so we feel like, and Frank feels like, that with that, the engineer, with that spanking, the engineer prevented Bland from living a life of crime as a train robber. So you never know. Okay? So engineers never knew what was going to be on the tracks. So look back and look forward. Village Springs, Highway 75, no longer there as a community, but it was there when the railroad arrived in Village Springs. So I'm showing you this would be a typical small town that's located at the railroad. So it ran right through the middle of town, ran beside East Railroad Street, which is still there with that name. It had a passenger depot with service to Birmingham. It had a water tower because you needed a lot of water for those steam engines, keep them filled. And then it had a Y, which was a triangle shape. So train tracks can't intersect another train tracks by perpendicular. So if it wants to go from these tracks to these, it has to go like this. Okay, so that creates a triangle. It also allows the train to turn around. So it can go here, back up, and go forward down the tracks. And so it had a Y right in the town that served to take a siding off to serve that mine at Village Springs. And then it provided the economic development there. It carried the coal from that mine, carried the local farm products to market, it brought the products to community. And a lot of the residents there worked on the railroad and in the mines. And then a new highway through town, Highway 75, eliminated part of the town, and then even more, the newer Highway 75 eliminated the rest of the town. So there was a head-on collision also near there, train wreck. So this is showing you saw this timetable, and so the train from Oneonta to and from Birmingham and Oneonta would have gone through Village Springs and would have provided passenger service there. So we have some name changes through the years also. And so a lot of times back then, historically, things were more oral. You didn't have as much written down. And so the Cane Creek branch in the Cane Creek, people would hear Cane and they would spell it C-A-N-E. And so now on the Freshwater Land Trust Trail, it's called Cane Creek C-A-N-E, when actually originally it was a family name, Cane. So same thing, Newfound Creek morphed into Newfoundland Creek, probably settled in that area by people from Newfoundland, Canada. Now it's called Newfound Creek. Magella became Magella. Two female names. Reader's Gap became written as Readers with the EA instead of EE. This was a family name. Same thing throughout the years. So there's also some name changes of the branches themselves. So this is just showing you Huntsville branch number 2 went from Tarrant all the way through Oneonta to Talladook and Alabama Mineral. So different times it was called different things, different names. Through the years. So there's a lot of changes through the years of these railroads. So serving Trussville is an example of the extension of the Birmingham Mineral Railroad to serve an outlying area. So this was a blast furnace here in Trussville, right where you're sitting. It's a blast furnace with the coke ovens on huge amount. So the coke ovens either were located at the mine, at the coal mine, to chains of coal in the coke before they shipped it to a blast furnace. But if the blast furnace was taking coal from a mine that didn't have coke ovens, the blast furnace had to produce that coke at the site. So you had coke ovens here extending all the way out here where the tennis courts are. Okay? So there's it showing that in operation, and here's where we are. And there's the tennis courts, coke oven site here, blast furnace site. Okay? And then I put one of my signs up there, as you've seen. So how did it get here? How did the Birmingham Mineral Railroad get here? So the Gate City branch came out of Gate City and in Irondale, and it served the mines on that side of Red Mountain, where it's now Red Mountain. I mean, on side which is Red Mountain, as a matter of fact, Ruffner Mountain. So Ruffner Mountain is just an extension of Red Mountain, by the way. So it served those on the Irondale side. And then it's called the Gate City branch. And then they extended the Gate City branch on past there out here to Trussville. So yours was a Gate City extension. And to do that, it came up over the ridge there at Sadler's Gap. So it came out of Ruffner Mountain here, and then across Sadler's Gap, there was a trestle here, and there's the abutments. I love the Sea Rock City sign or sticker on the car there. So there it was then, here it is now. So those abutments are gone because they needed to widen Highway 11. So it came here, went under the interstate, or where the interstate is, and then it followed what the valley, again, needed to stay flat, and so it followed the same valley or area where the interstate is now. And then it left that area, Valley Road, on the way, to the Pinnacle. And so Valley Road here is where it took, coming on by the quarry, Brand's Quarry here, taking the limestone not only to this blast furnace, but also to Birmingham. So that was a big quarry it served, looped around Green Road, and then through, we'll see all of this in detail, to the furnace here. It did not connect with the railroad going through here, the Norfolk Southern, what became the Norfolk Southern. So the Norfolk Southern at one point had a branch coming off toward the blast furnace, but then when the Birmingham Mineral came in, it was all served by Birmingham Mineral. So I understand there was a little branch off of here at one point. Okay, so now we'll look at some details here. It had to cut through a ridge on Trussville Clay Road. So here's that ridge right there. And I've got signs along at this point and up here, signs here, and then downtown here. Okay? So it cut through the ridge. Originally, the ridge was cut originally for beside a wagon road. If you do that, a separate dirt road had been cut into the ridge, and then the railroads expanded that. So then when the railroad no longer was there, they expanded this cut and made it into what we have today. But up in the trees here was the old wagon road. So originally the person that owns this said that he wondered if he had the railroad right of way there, the railroad road bit, but he doesn't. He had the wagon road that also curved around the corner here, okay? So here, if you go around the corner and then you start heading toward Parkway, then you come to Moss Rock Ridge Road, just a little short road there. And just after you come and enter that road, this is the original wagon road head. You see it's humped up a little, and here's the Birmingham Mineral Railroad road bed. Okay? And then there's a house here. So you can see both of them right together there as they head to downtown. Okay, so then it came here and then followed on around Parkway, and here's where we are now. So there is a map of that back in 1940, and you can see the person, John Shears, overlaid the blast furnace site with its coke ovens overlaid on the slag heap village houses that have been built there. Okay, so we're sitting right in here. Okay? So some fun then and now photographs. We saw this that was a Port Road, which was a dirt street back then, and there it is now. Okay? So that's Porto Madrid, and what it looks like. That's the interstate there. Eastwood Mall would have been behind me here. And in English Village, this was there back when the train was active here. And then there it is today, and that building is still there behind the trees. And then we saw the platform, the Amtrak platform is still using that same 1930s platform for loading onto the train. Below Vulcan, we saw the streetcar being built here, Birmingham Mineral coming across here, and that's what it looks like now. This abutment is still there. The concrete abutment is still there. So there's that concrete abutment. And again, use of concrete, and it's slag concrete. So you got slag here, you had slag everywhere, you had a blast furnace, you had to get rid of it. And so one of a company created it as the Birmingham Slag Company, because it sell all this byproduct there that it could make use of. And it sell it as road bed for streets and highways, as well as for railroad road bed, as well as for concrete. So instead of having to use river rocks in the concrete, they use pieces of slag. So does anybody know what the Birmingham Slag Company morphed into becoming and is today? Vulcan Materials. Vulcan Materials started as a company that was taking advantage of inexpensive, if not free, waste product out of the blast furnaces. So Vulcan, when it was brought from the World's Fair in St. Louis to Birmingham, it weighed in pieces before they built the pedestal and all the WPA days. And so it laid beside Birmingham Mineral Railroad tracks because, they bought on railroad and then offloaded it there. And then when it was built and installed, it was installed right next to the Birmingham Mineral Railroad tracks at different locations. So. And here we go, again, going over the active tracks out in the Irondale area. And then here I'm taking a picture of the then and now. And yes, I was illegal in walking over and taking the picture, but didn't get arrested. So Inslee, and there's what Inslee looks like now, Inslee site. And then a SIPCO, it had these are the tracks, Birmingham Mineral, going on to the SIPCO site, and then they let me put my sign up on the fence over here. And we looked at Bessemer, Passenger Depot, Freight Depot, and this is a different building, but the tracks are still there, and they're still in use. So this is a milepost, mile 403, and so the engineer had to know where he was up and down the rails. Just like on the interstate, you had mileposts. So everywhere, every mile, he would have a milepost. He could know where he was, because he may have train orders that at mile 409, he needed to go off to a siding to a certain line. So he might know where he was. He also could calculate his time, his speed, by the time that he passed by one milepost to the next one. So if it took him 60 seconds to get from one to the other, he knew how fast it was going. Okay, so these are still out there, actually still being used by the active railroads. So here's one in Bessemer. So why is it 403? So the milepost numbering started at the headquarters of that railroad company. So like in Louisville, Kentucky, downtown is the headquarters building. It's still there in use for other purpose. And the train rails started there numbering. And so 0 and then 1 all the way down to Birmingham. In the Birmingham area, the numbering is in the 300s and 400s because that's how far we are from Louisville, Kentucky downtown. But when they built a branch, they needed to have some starting number for that branch. And so wherever the beginning of that branch was, if it was near milepost 403 from Louisville, they would start the numbering on that branch as 403, 404, 405 on out. So then it became not the distance from Louisville, but they had to have a starting point. So that's what we're finding there. So in Bessemer, also looking toward the pipe company, had a streetcar there. And this is the Y, remember the triangle that you had to have for intersecting behind the Lowe's in Bessemer, right by the interstate. And this is still active tracks to this day being used by CSX. And we saw Altoona Depot, and there's where we think the site was in Altoona. There was a second Altoona depot built later, and there's where it would have been built, and this is the old road bed. Woodlawn, we talked about where the first sign went up. Woodlawn went into disrepair, depot did, and then they repaired it and restored it and moved it down to Calera, where it is now. We saw Settlers Gap, we saw how it looks now. And then some of the rails have been turned into walking trails. So the past and present, where the past meets the present. So this is a sign that I'm putting up throughout central Alabama. So we've got them in all 6 counties served by the railroad. So I'll leave it at that. Take any questions that you have. Visit the website. I've got a menu down the right-hand side that's got a lot of historic maps, a list of all the branches and where they went. So feel free to explore that. Any questions? Yes, ma'am.
We live on Trussville Clay Road. We have the railroad bed in the back of the house.
Excellent.
Yes, back to property. And all this time, I was telling my husband the other day, I mean, I knew, and I tell people there's no railroad bed in that. And I knew about this historic Birmingham Mineral Railroad because of you. Then all of a sudden, I put it all together.
Oh.
You know, I mean, I knew we had the railroad and all, but then I just...
This is your railroad.
Yeah. And now that I was thinking about what you're saying about the culverts and all, I think there is one back there.
Oh, that'd be great to know about.
I've always been looking for arrowheads in that area because there's a stream there.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking that the culvert is right where I just walked around and looked.
Yeah.
It seems to be, he doesn't know as much what I'm talking about because he hasn't been down there as much as I have. Okay, so I just want to mention that. But in the other question.
Well, to pick up on that, I would love to have a picture of that, if you don't mind. If you
just to keep it clear.
Right.
It's just too long, so it's all blown up. And you can't really see anything.
Sure. But again, if it is one of these, it's still carrying that water.
Okay, well, I'll check and see.
Okay, do.
But, did you say that all of the railroad, not tires, but
the rails?
Yeah, were they all removed in this area?
Usually, but I can't speak for a particular area.
Well, I might could find one.
There might be one, yeah. So the way that we generally figure out if it's a railroad roadbed or not, there's several ways. One, I look on the maps, in the old maps, and there's a great USGS site online that's all free that you can put in the search bar, something like Trussville, Alabama, and it will pull up the current USGS, United States Geological Survey. They handle all the topo maps they produce. So it brings up the current map of Trussville. And then down on the left side, there will be little images of maps through the years. So they start in late 1800s, and then you can click on one of those maps and it will overlay it onto the current map. Okay, and then as a slider bar, you can look through the old map to the current one. So you can see, the railroad in the old days, and then you can see where it is today, or where that went on today's map. You have to realize that some of those old maps are not exactly accurate. So you might have a creek coming here on the current map, and it might be offset on the old map, so you do have to adjust that sometimes in your mind. But that's the way I find a lot of the old road beds, is I look first there and see where it was back in the 1800s. And then when I go out, I also look at Google Earth, and I'll look at Street View on Google Earth, and sometimes you can spot them on Google Earth. You can either see that it's now a walking trail, or you can see, even on Google Earth sometimes, you can see that there's no trees much growing there. Okay, and then you drive out there, and trees don't like to grow in ballast rock that has been pounded down by the weight of the locomotives. So sometimes you'll have some little short scrub trees and all, but a lot of times it'll be clear of trees that are trees on either side. So looking for things like that. And then if we really are trying to figure out, that's a pretty good indication. But if we're really trying to find out a particular spot within an area, a lot of times we'll drive a metal stake down, and if we hit cross ties underneath there, we know we're there. Okay. Or we may dig down a little bit and see if we're hitting slag that may be a part of the roadbed or limestone rocks or something. And if we dig up some of the dirt and there's a cross tie, we know where we are. Just like on Vulcan Trail, there's a tipple the material came out of the mine on the mountain, came up to a crusher, was crushed, fell, the tipple let it fall into the Birmingham Mineral Railroad road cars to carry it off to blast furnace. Well, when you've got the tracks here and you have to pull off the cars to be loaded, you don't want to do it on the tracks because that ties up the tracks. No other trains go. So they'd have a siding right beside it. Matter of fact, at that tipple on Vulcan Trail is some grass, and in the grass you can see the old cross ties for the siding. So we look for those kind of things. So, oh yeah, go looking for it. Yeah, right. Yeah. So, sometimes you can find the spikes. There's some. Yeah.
I'll send you a picture.
Okay, that'd be great. We'll put it in our records. Great. Yes, sir.
When did your interest in this stuff? When did that start?
Right. Good question.
How much work has this been for you?
Okay. So the first part of it is that years ago, before I ever got involved in historic railroading, I liked railroads in the past when I was growing up. As a matter of fact, I learned how moving freight trains when I was a child because our house, in one place we lived, you could walk a couple, 3 blocks down to the big railroad yard. And so we'd go down and we'd hop freight trains and ride them through town because they took a big semicircular kind of area. And then we could hop off the moving train and walk back home. So, and that came in handy because I was putting up a sign in North Birmingham, which is not it's sort of an iffy area. And so I was putting the sign up and active CSX tracks right there on the old roadbed. And so I heard the train coming and I thought, I'll get a picture of the train, active train with my sign, there. And so the better view though was on the other side of the tracks as he was coming, because coming around a curve. So I walked over on the other side of the tracks. So the train comes by and he had empty coal cars. And so he had lots of coal cars. And so as the train would go by, in between the cars, I could see my van over there with my sign and all my tools, my van open, all my tools laying out on the ground. And I thought, I don't know how. At one point, one guy walks down the sidewalk and sort of glanced over at that stuff, So I knew that I had to get over there. So I walked over the pavement there because it was a street crossing on the tracks there. Walked over the pavement, hopped on the moving train, walked between the cars, and hopped off on those sides. So my education as a child came in handy on how you hop on the train. Anyway, nothing happened, everything was okay, but I knew I had to get over there. So anyway, so even before that, my boss, I'd heard that staff at Vulcan had done a tour of a railroad along Montclair Road. I said, what? And so, put that in the back of my mind. We lived not far from Montclair Road. And then my boss bought a house, and it's between Montclair Road and us. And he said, James, come by sometime. I want to show you my backyard. They told me that right on the side of the backyard was the railroad tracks. So, there was a fence and there was this roadbed there. It didn't look like a railroad tracks, but it was a roadbed. Put that in the back of my mind. And then somebody told me that train went right through English Village, James. And so I went over to English Village and found where the tracks had been and walked all the way out to the cut at Red Mountain on the old roadbed. Just put that in the back of my mind. So then I got involved in the Historic Railroad organization. And I thought, now, near my house, I didn't know anything about this old historic railroad. There must be lots of other people that also don't know about it. And so I thought, okay, how can I educate people about it? So I thought, well, I'll make these simple signs and just put them up where people will see them. And so that's how it all started. And then it just, as a matter of fact, one of the other people in the Railroad History organization, when I told them what my idea was and, started putting this up, said, James, do you realize that will be a lifelong project? I said, no, I hadn't thought that far ahead, and it has been a lifelong project. And so anyway, so Peggy and I go out, and we have the post. I have a van that will hold the 10-foot post. I had to take my my tape measure to buy that van to make sure that the post would fit in it, So I have my tools and my post and the signs and all, and we'll find out where one is. We'll go explore it first and see if it really was a road bed. And we'll stop and what I do is I drive a metal stake in the ground first to see if I hit a boulder or something on the ground and move over. And then if we don't, drive a post in, or in the past I would dig a post hole and put the post in. And so we have installed all 199 of them. And sometimes I have the luxury of adding them to an existing historic post or something. And then we'll go. We've been all over the 6 counties in Alabama doing this, and got more to do. I'm pretty sure where I'm going to put the 200th one. We had a little ceremony for the 100th one, and actually you have a 100th one here. So we put it out in North Jefferson County for the Rotary Club. They gave the finances for 100, but we moved the Rotary Club symbol here because it was the Daybreak Rotary Club. And so we put it here so more people would see that the Rotary Club had supported the installation of that one. So anyway, we got more to do.
That's about project number 2.
Oh, yeah. So as part of this project, I would see these mileposts that you saw, the milepost investment. And I think, and some of those are where people would see them. Like in downtown Calera, there's a little park there and there's a milepost. But nobody's telling anybody what these mileposts, they're historic. I'm talking about the concrete ones. They're about 4 feet high, massive concrete, and have the number on them. The newer ones, like a metal sign on a metal post, I'm not worried about. But these historic ones, nobody was telling them what this was all about. As a matter of fact, on the trail in Fultondale, whole length of that trail, there's 4 of those mileposts. And so nobody's telling anybody walking on the trail what this thing is. So James thought, well, why not educate people, right? So same size sign, same colors, and I have a description of milepost and what it was used for as a speedometer type use, and for the engineer to know where he was. Just simple wording there. And so I put those up next to these mileposts, and so the concrete post nearby, blah, 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 and educate people. So I've also found some, and have on the website, and those are all listed on the website, also on the map showing where they all are. But I've got some more to do. But some of them I've got them on the list on the website, but I won't put a sign there because the street crossing, there's no place to pull off and actually read the thing, because its lettering is smaller than the other, and so I know they're there, but there's no reason to put one there because you can't get to it. So anyway, and then number 3, I was putting one up in Wetumpka, and those don't have to be Birmingham Mineral Railroad. They can be any railroad company, any tracks that have one of those mileposts. And so Wetumpka, a person I know, her backyard goes to the L&N railroad roadbed former there, and she's got one of those mileposts. So I put a milepost up there. I put one of mine there. I actually refurbished hers, repainted and all that. And so for the people at the street to see it and read it, I came down the roadbed there, and you can see the post in the distance, but I put one up. And I was putting that one up, and I looked around and said, what in the world are these? They're concrete pillars, about this high, about that size, 4 of them. They were foundations for the railroad water tank, right there. And so I had a sign made describing that water tank was there, and it had, serving the steam engines. And so now I've got that sign. Next time when I'll add that to the milepost sign there. So I encourage you to do some inexpensive signage like this to educate people wherever you know something that needs to be highlighted. These are made for about $45 by a company in Birmingham, and they do onesies or multiples for me. And so I just give them the image, and they do it and go with it. And so it's very inexpensive. I'm using used posts now. You don't believe how many posts are laying off in the side that the city has taken up and thrown off to the side or whatever. And if they're bent, they don't want them anymore. So I got them and cut off the bent part, and I've got a good post there. Anyway, very inexpensive kind of thing to do to highlight things that may be around in your historical area. So, sorry, I didn't mean to go on and on, but.
Yeah, I grew up in Roebuck Flats, about 2 blocks from Saddler's Gap.
Excellent.
And I worked with you on getting the sign put up for Saddler's Gap.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah, I believe I worked with your son-in-law at AWTN.
Yeah. Greg, yeah. Cool.
So I spent a lot of my childhood riding up and down the railroad bed between Saddler's Gap and Morrow Gap.
Oh, yeah.
But I've been trying to locate a stop along the Mineral Railroad called Catoctin. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not familiar. What in that same area?
It may be renamed or something. I've been thinking it's about where the Worthington line was,
Okay.
which is just the other side. You know where Alfred mines?
Right.
I think it's across the gap from Alfred mines, but I haven't been able to verify it.
Well, I can look, and the USGS maps oftentimes did not have the name of a mine. They might have the symbol, but they might not have the name. But we can look on the old USGS maps and see if they have that on the maps.
But that mine, that was the Worthington mines, and also known as the Smith Eastman mines.
Oh, yeah.
But that's not far from where I grew up. But I've been trying to locate where that was. And that's where I was just saying if you.
Okay, so contact me, send an email to me and mention all that, because I told somebody else that early on in the project, I realized that I needed to just learn about the Birmingham Mineral Railroad and just learn about railroads, and within that, just the Birmingham Mineral, because there's so much to know. And I realized that if I tried to learn about the mines, even the mines certainly, my brain would be gone, you know. And so there are people that know this
Just a stop along,
Right.
or maybe a service spur.
Yeah.
I didn't know if there was anything. I haven't been able to verify that any.
Well, Tom Denny and Jeff Newman are the local experts on the mining in Birmingham. So I know Tom knows a lot about the Alfreda in this area. So I can get him, if you'll email me and remind me, I can get him to look on his stuff and see if there's a mine that has, with that name or that was close to that spot. And then when you email me, I'll also look at the USGS old maps and see if maybe, because a lot of times those maps will have a location where it's no longer in existence, or a very small location. But also the railroads had stops that were not on any of the maps, any of the USGS maps or anything like that. But they'd have oftentimes the station list, the old station list for all the stations on a particular branch. If it had an agent name, then that was an indication it had a passenger station, and that it had a community around it or nearby. Okay, so
I found the mention in a news article about, I think there had been like a murder or something at the Catoctin station. And I found maybe one other mention, but I haven't been able to find it on any maps or anything.
Well, surely send that to me, because I'll look on the old USGS.
Right.
And there's another person in our group who is great at looking up those old newspapers and finding things and searching on a word. And you wouldn't believe what's available newspaper-wise out of it is amazing.
I know what kind of a rabbit hole it can be too.
Oh, yeah. And so he'll send me a article because there's something mentioned in Birmingham Mineral, and I'll read the whole page, and I have found a lot of stuff that I've then passed on to local historians or whatever, other kind of things on that same page that has nothing to do with the railroad. But it's very interesting what is out there and is available. So,
Did you say that the Mineral Railroad, as it came down Parkway, did it connect with the AGS?
not really. Okay. So I've not.
I got a topo map that shows where it connects there.
And it could have been, but from what I understand, and I don't know for sure, but what I understand is it wasn't actively using that to get anywhere. Okay.
Yeah.
So the maps that I have show no Y there. So an indication would be you got to have a Y to connect to another railroad, or unless you do it as a one-way connection. In other words, you got the railroad, the AGS here, and if you come to there, you've either got to have a Y to go both ways, which is an indication that they were using that trackage for other purposes, or, but if you only got one going this way, then that's a one-way, like toward Birmingham. Okay.
Right down here near the main intersection in Trussville, where the depot used to stand, the slab is still, the slab for the depot is still there. Well, there's a spur that splits off right there. And I think it's been used as a loading spur for some businesses. But it's about where it might split off to join the Mineral Railroad, but it ends not far away. But
yeah, it would be interesting everything I've seen doesn't have them actually joining, but it'd be interesting to know if they did. So if we can research and figure it.
It's right there where it could have served that little spur could have served the depot right there, but it could be repurposed. It could be a new spur.
Yeah, and all over you find, even around Sloss Furnace, you'll find the spur going off just to the warehouses. Didn't connect to anything else, but it's going off to the warehouse. So it'd be interesting to try to figure out whether it actually connected up, because one of the things I've seen is it does this, it stops before, the Birmingham Mineral stopped before, but that doesn't mean that map was accurate enough, or that they were, so it also could have been that it originally was planning to come and connect, but it turned out that it didn't. In other words, it was headed that way, but it turned out that they decided to just use the other route. Now, there had been a shorter if they could get trackage rights. But a lot of times back then, they wouldn't give them trackage rights, because that meant that they couldn't, like AGS might have wanted to save their trackage rights and not provide trackage for Birmingham Mineral.
Right, the topo map I saw where they connected with the AGS was about 1907.
Okay. Well, it'll be interesting to follow up on that and just see whether we can find out.
Yeah.
Cool.
And the spur that I talked about is still there, but it's half buried. So,
sure.
But it looks partially rusted, but I don't know how old it is.
Now, one of the things we could check is whether, are the rails still on that spur, some of them?
Yes, the rails, yeah, they are.
So we could measure the size of the rails and see whether they're related to the earlier or the later diesel period, as opposed to Birmingham Mineral. I can give you the size of the Birmingham Mineral era rails, and we could see that might be an indication.
That's a good indication, yes.
Okay.